The air on Saturday, October 1st, carried the first true chill of autumn. A crisp, clean scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke that Patrick Bryant usually loved. But this morning, the scent was soured by the sight of Kimberly Hall standing on the edge of his property line. She wasn't just on the edge. She was hovering, a predator surveying her territory. With her was a man in a crisp blue Oxford shirt, holding a clipboard and a laser measuring device. They were positioned on the strip of neatly mown grass that constituted the community's common area, a shared buffer of green that separated the backyards of the homes on Aspen Court. They were pointing directly at Patrick's cabin. The cabin was the reason he and Rachel had bought this house in the coveted Laurel Creek Estates 2 years ago. A perfectly preserved 1960s structure with dark-stained cedar siding and a simple gabled roof. It had been the original property's main dwelling before the larger house was built in the 90s. Now, it was Patrick's architecture studio, his sanctuary, his office, the place where blueprints and daydreams became tangible realities. Kimberly's voice, engineered for both cloying friendliness and sharp command, carried clearly across the 30 feet of lawn separating them. You see, Mr. Vance, the issue is one of aesthetic integrity. The structure, as it stands, is incongruous with the approved architectural vernacular of Laurel Creek. Mr. Vance, the architect, scribbled a note on his clipboard. The setback seems compliant from here, but I'd need to see the original plat. The siding is a bit dated, but structurally. It's not a matter of structure, Kimberly interrupted, her tone smooth, but edged with steel. It's a matter of harmony. It obstructs the view corridor from the upper common area. It looms. Patrick felt a familiar, hot prickle of anger at the back of his neck. Looms. The single-story, 400-square-foot cabin was nestled under the shade of a magnificent old oak tree. It was the least looming structure on the block. He slid open the glass door of his main house and stepped onto the patio, holding a mug of coffee. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Good morning, Kimberly," he said, his tone deliberately placid. "Something I can help you with?" Kimberly turned, her face a mask of practiced surprise, as if she hadn't been fully aware he might be home. Her smile was a perfect, white, predatory crescent. "Patrick, good morning. I was just having Mr. Vance, from our Architectural Review Committee, take a look at some of the common area sightlines. We're considering some new landscaping initiatives." Patrick took a slow sip of his coffee. "Is that right? Because from here, it looks less like you're inspecting the common area and more like you're surveying my private property." He took a step off his patio and walked toward the invisible line dividing his lot from the community's. "You both know full well that the property line is marked by the sprinkler heads. You're welcome to inspect the community's grass all you like, but I'd appreciate it if you'd direct your clipboards and your opinions elsewhere." His politeness was a shield, but the message was unmistakable. The social humiliation was subtle, a quiet but firm check on her authority in front of a colleague. Mr. Vance had the good sense to look embarrassed, tucking his clipboard under his arm and taking a half step back. Kimberly's smile tightened by a millimeter, the only sign that his words had landed. "Of course, Patrick. We're just doing our due diligence. It's my responsibility as board president to ensure our governing documents are upheld for the benefit of all homeowners." The emphasis on all was a scalpel, meant to paint him as a selfish outlier. "And it's my right as a homeowner to enjoy my property without being scrutinized from the sidelines," Patrick replied, his voice still even. "Have a nice rest of your walkthrough." He turned and walked back into his house without waiting for a reply, sliding the door shut with a soft click. He watched as Kimberly said something sharp and low to Mr. Vance, who nodded quickly. They turned and continued their walk along the common area, their backs rigid with indignation. A stillness settled in Patrick's chest. This wasn't about landscaping. This was a declaration. It was the opening move in a game he didn't want to play. Inside, the house was quiet and warm. The scent of Rachel's lavender and chamomile tea hung in the air, a deliberate attempt to create the low-stress environment her doctor had ordered. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a little girl, and the last trimester had brought with it a worrying spike in her blood pressure. Patrick found her in the living room, curled on the sofa with a book on her lap, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking up. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, were shadowed with a constant, low-grade fatigue. "Just Kimberly being Kimberly," he said, forcing a casual tone as he kissed the top of her head, conducting a top-secret inspection of the community's crabgrass. Rachel sighed, a soft exhalation of weary resignation. "Just try to ignore her. Honey, we don't need the drama right now." He knew she was right. They had poured everything into this house, into this life. The cabin wasn't just his office. It was the financial engine that allowed him to work as a freelance architect, to be present for Rachel and the baby. Its existence meant he didn't have to rent expensive office space downtown. It meant he could design custom homes for clients across the country from the quiet, sun-dappled space just 50 feet from his back door. Their life was here, woven into the fabric of this house, this yard, this cabin. And Kimberly Hall was a threat to all of it. His history with Kimberly wasn't just a neighborhood rivalry. It was a ghost from a past she had tried to bury. Back in high school, during a final exam for AP Chemistry, Patrick had watched Kimberly expertly swap her exam booklet with the one belonging to the class valedictorian, while the teacher was distracted. He hadn't said anything at first, not wanting to cause a scene. But when Kimberly was later lauded for scoring the highest grade in the class, a distinction that secured her a prestigious academic scholarship, the injustice of it had gnawed at him. He'd anonymously reported what he saw to the principal. An investigation followed. Handwriting was analyzed, and Kimberly's cheating was exposed. She lost the scholarship and endured a public, humiliating suspension. She had never forgiven him. He was sure she recognized him the day they moved in, though she'd pretended otherwise. Over the past 2 years, her hostility had been a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, passive-aggressive comments in the community newsletter about unneighborly work-from-home arrangements, a sudden enforcement of a trash can rule that seemed to apply only to their house, a general air of icy disapproval at community gatherings. He was the living reminder of her greatest humiliation. And now, as president of the Laurel Creek Estates Homeowners Association, she held a position of petty, bureaucratic power over him. She wasn't just his neighbor. She was his de facto landlord, a queen ruling over a tiny fiefdom of vinyl siding and manicured lawns. Later that afternoon, a vague sense of unease prompted Patrick to pull out their closing documents from the file cabinet. He found the thick, bound volume of the Laurel Creek Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, the Bible of the HOA. He spent an hour poring over the dense legalese, his architect's eye scanning for anything related to outbuildings. He found the clause she was likely sharpening into a weapon, CC&Rs, Progrorate 4.2, outbuildings and accessory structures. It stated, all detached structures, including but not limited to sheds, workshops, and studios, must be harmonious with the community's overall aesthetic and architectural theme as determined in the sole discretion of the Architectural Review Committee ARC. The phrase sole discretion was a blank check for subjective enforcement. It was vague, powerful, and perfectly suited for a vendetta. But then, As he flipped back to the beginning of the document, he found something else. A clause he had underlined when they first reviewed the papers. CC&Rs, Paragraph 3.1.5, Pre-existing conditions and grandfathering. The language was clear and unambiguous. Any structure, improvement, or landscaping feature existing on a private lot at the time of the initial property sale from the developer, Laurel Creek Homes, LLC, to the first homeowner of said lot shall be deemed approved and grandfathered in perpetuity, exempt from future architectural modifications mandated by the ARC, unless such structure poses a direct threat to public health or safety. Patrick's cabin had been part of the property since before the HOA even existed. It was on the original survey he'd received at closing. He was not the first homeowner, but the principle of the clause was clear if it was there from the beginning. It was protected. A wave of relief washed over him. He had a defense, a clear, document-based, ironclad defense. He highlighted both sections with a yellow marker, whatever Kimberly was planning. He was ready. He thought, naively, that the facts would be enough. The email arrived on Monday, October 15th. It wasn't from Kimberly, but from the HOA's management company, a faceless entity called Aspire Community Management. The subject line was chillingly neutral: courtesy notice, architectural compliance review, 122 Aspen Court. Patrick's heart gave a slight, nervous lurch. He clicked it open. Date October 15th, 2023. To Patrick Bryant, homeowner, 122 Aspen Court, from Aspire Community Management. On behalf of the Laurel Creek Estates, HOA Board of Directors, subject courtesy notice, architectural compliance review, 122 Aspen Court. Dear Mr. Bryant, this email serves as a courtesy notice regarding a potential violation of the Laurel Creek Estates governing documents. A recent review conducted by the Architectural Review Committee ARC has identified a potential compliance issue with the detached accessory structure herein after the outbuilding located on your property. As per the Laurel Creek Estates CC&Rs, Article 8, Section 8.4.2, all outbuildings must be harmonious with the community's overall aesthetic and architectural theme. The committee has raised concerns that the aforementioned outbuilding may not be in compliance with this standard. This is a courtesy notice only and does not constitute a formal violation at this time. We request that you contact Aspire Community Management within 7 days to discuss a potential remediation plan. Failure to respond may result in the issuance of a formal violation notice and the commencement of the enforcement process as outlined in the bylaws. We appreciate your cooperation in helping to maintain the aesthetic integrity and property values of our community. Sincerely, the Laurel Creek Estates HOA Board of Directors, CO Aspire Community Management. The language was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. It was polite, procedural, and utterly threatening. The words blurred into a formal, weaponized cloud of passive aggression, potential violation, potential compliance issue, may not be in compliance. It was an accusation wrapped in layers of plausible deniability. Patrick read it 3 times, each time a fresh wave of indignation washing over him. This was it. The game had begun. Patrick refused to be baited into an emotional response. He was an architect. He dealt in facts, figures, and codes. He would handle this the same way he handled a difficult building inspector, with professionalism, documentation, and unwavering politeness. He spent 20 minutes composing a reply, attaching a PDF of his property survey showing the cabin as a pre-existing structure. To Aspire Community Management, CC Laurel Creek, Estates HOA Board of Directors, subject recourtesy, notice architectural compliance review, 122 Aspen Court. Dear Aspire Management and Board of Directors, thank you for your email dated October 15th. I am writing to seek clarification regarding the potential compliance issue with the accessory structure on my property. The structure in question was part of the property when my wife and I purchased our home and, to my understanding, has been on this lot since its initial development. As such, it should be protected under CC&Rs 4.3.1.5, which grandfathers pre-existing structures. For your reference, I have attached a copy of my official property survey from closing, which clearly delineates the structure. Could you please specify the exact nature of the alleged non-compliance with Berber 8.4.2? The term harmonious is quite subjective, and the structure has been a part of this property's aesthetic for decades without issue. I am confident this is a simple misunderstanding that we can clear up quickly. I look forward to your prompt reply. Best regards. Patrick Bryant, 122 Aspen Court. He hit send, feeling a small measure of satisfaction. It was a reasonable, evidence-backed inquiry. He had cited the governing documents and provided proof. The ball was in their court. For 3 days, there was only silence. The lack of a response was more unnerving than an angry reply would have been. On the 4th day, he sent a polite follow-up. The next day, he received a reply. It was not the clarification he had requested. To Patrick Bryant, from Aspire Community Management Subject, Courtesy Notice. Mr. Bryant, thank you for your correspondence. The Board of Directors has received your email and is reviewing the matter. Pursuant to the Board's directive, we cannot engage in informal correspondence on this issue. All communication must be conducted through official channels to ensure proper documentation. Please refer to future documentation sent via certified mail. We trust this clarifies the situation. Best. Kimberly Hall, President on behalf of the Laurel Creek Estates, HOA Board of Directors. It was signed by Kimberly, a clear signal that she was personally directing the stonewalling. The email was a bureaucratic brick wall, a polite get lost disguised in procedural language. The promise of certified mail was not a reassurance. It was a threat. The certified letter arrived a week later, on October 22nd. The green slip in the mailbox felt like a summons. Patrick had to go to the post office and show his ID to retrieve the envelope. It was thick and heavy with portent. He sat in his car in the post office parking lot and tore it open. Inside was the formal notice of violation. It was a multi-page document, complete with a cover letter on Aspire Management letterhead, citing the same vague FAR 8.4.2. It stated that his response was insufficient to resolve the compliance issue, and that the board had voted to officially declare the cabin in violation. It completely ignored his citation of the grandfather clause. The notice gave him 14 days to submit a remediation plan to the ARC. The suggested remedies were horrifyingly specific. 1. Submit architectural plans and a materials list to re-side the entire structure with board-approved vinyl siding in one of 3 approved shades of beige. 2. Submit a landscaping plan to install view-mitigating foliage along the common area boundary. 3. Demolish the structure entirely. The notice concluded by stating that if a satisfactory plan was not received by the deadline, the board would schedule a formal hearing, after which fines of $100 per day could be levied against his property. Patrick sat in his car, the documents trembling slightly in his hands. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, procedural assault designed to bury him in paperwork and force him into a financially ruinous choice: destroy the character of his studio, or tear it down. The bureaucracy wasn't a monster. It was Kimberly's chosen weapon, and she was wielding it with surgical precision. The formal violation notice was a declaration of war. Patrick knew he couldn't fight it through polite emails. He needed more ammunition, more facts. He needed to understand the battlefield better than his opponent. His first stop was the county recorder's office. The building was a drab, gray monument to bureaucracy, filled with the dusty scent of old paper and the low hum of fluorescent lights. He spent 2 hours navigating the county's clunky online portal before a helpful clerk finally showed him how to pull the original plat maps for the Laurel Creek development. He printed out a high-resolution copy of his subdivision's map. There, clear as day, was his lot. Number 42, with the footprint of both the main house and the smaller cabin already drawn in. The map was dated 1994, 2 years before the HOA was even incorporated. This was concrete proof that the cabin predated the CC&Rs he was being accused of violating. But, as he was folding the map, a notation on the common area behind his property caught his eye. 15D, Scenic View Corridor Easement. C deed, 94-381-2. This had to be what Kimberly was talking about. He asked the clerk to pull the deed. The document was dense with legalese, but Patrick's experience with zoning codes helped him parse it. The easement was real, but its purpose was specific. It prohibited the HOA from planting trees or erecting structures on the common area itself that would block the view of the distant hills from the community's upper walking path. Crucially, the final sentence of the deed clarified its limits. This easement applies exclusively to the designated common area parcel and shall not encumber, restrict, or apply to any structures or improvements located on adjacent private lots. A slow grin spread across Patrick's face. Kimberly wasn't just misinterpreting the rules. She was intentionally misrepresenting a legal document recorded with the county. She was counting on no one bothering to check the source. His next step was to request official records from the HOA. Citing state law, he sent a formal, written request to Aspire Management for the unredacted board of directors, meeting minutes for the past 6 months. 10 days later, he received a thick envelope. The minutes were inside, but they were a joke. Entire sections, sometimes half a page at a time, were completely blacked out with a thick marker. The heading for most of the redacted sections was the same Community Enhancement Committee meeting report. It was a dead end, but a telling one. What was this committee, and why was its business so secret? Feeling overwhelmed, Patrick decided to seek advice. He walked down the street to the home of Arthur Abernathy, a retired city planner in his late 70s who had lived in Laurel Creek since it was built. Abernathy was a famously cantankerous but brilliant man who despised HOA overreach with a fiery passion. Patrick found him in his garage, meticulously sharpening a pair of gardening shears. He laid out the violation notice, the plat map, and the easement deed on Abernathy's workbench. The old man put on his reading glasses and studied the documents, a wry smile playing on his lips. Ah, a classic aesthetic violation. Abernathy scoffed, tapping the notice with a gnarled finger. The last refuge of a tyrant with a clipboard. Vague, subjective, and impossible to disprove without a fight. He examined the plat map and the easement deed. And here's her lever, the view corridor. She's hoping you're too lazy or too intimidated to go to the county. She's counting on the word easement, scaring you into submission. He jabbed a finger at the deed's final sentence. But this right here, this is your shield. This proves she's lying. Not misinformed. Lying. Patrick then showed him the redacted minutes. Abernathy let out a short, barking laugh. Community Enhancement Committee. Good heavens, that's a new one. Sounds like a Kimberly Hall special. In my day, we called that the Let's Figure Out How to Squeeze the Homeowners Committee. He leaned back, the gears in his sharp mind turning. Redactions like this mean one of two things. Either they're discussing something legally sensitive, like pending litigation Or they're discussing something they don't want the members to know about. Given our dear president, I'm betting on the latter. Abernathy's guidance was invaluable. He told Patrick where to look, what to ask for, and how to frame his arguments in the language of bylaws and statutes. "Remember, son," he said, his eyes glinting behind his glasses. HOA boards have power, but it's not absolute. Their power comes from the documents. You just have to know the documents better than they do. Or, in this case, better than they want you to. The stakes were now officially escalating. On November 1st, another certified letter arrived. It was a notice of hearing. He was summoned to appear before the board on November 15th to show cause why a fine should not be levied for his ongoing violation. The bureaucratic machine was grinding forward, pulling him deeper into a conflict that was consuming his time, his energy, and his peace of mind. The threat of fines, a lien on his house, and a protracted legal battle now felt terrifyingly real. The phrase Community Enhancement Committee stuck in Patrick's mind. It sounded so bland, so corporate, yet it was the subject of every redaction. What could possibly be so secret? Frustrated, he started a broad internet search, typing Laurel Creek Estates and Community Enhancement Committee into the search bar. The first few pages were useless, filled with links to the official HOA website and Aspire Management's portal. But on the fourth page of results, he found a link to a long-defunct community blog, a primitive-looking website from the early 2000s that hadn't been updated in over a decade. It was a relic, a digital ghost of neighborhood potlucks and garage sale announcements. Out of sheer desperation, he clicked on a section labeled HOA Document Archive. A former board member, a fierce advocate for transparency, had apparently spent years scanning and uploading every piece of official HOA correspondence he could get his hands on. And there, in a folder dated 6 months ago, was a PDF file labeled May Board Meeting Minutes, unofficial copy. His heart hammered in his chest. He clicked it open. The document was a clean scan of the official minutes, but without a single redaction. He scrolled down to the section titled Community Enhancement Committee Meeting Report, presented by Kimberly Hall. His eyes scanned the text, and the breath caught in his throat. Committee Chair K. Hall provided an update on preliminary discussions with Stonegate developers regarding the Laurel Creek Terraces redevelopment proposal. Stonegate has expressed significant interest in acquiring a contiguous block of 12 lots along the northern edge of the community for a proposed luxury condominium project. The project is contingent on successful zoning variance applications with the city and the voluntary acquisition of all targeted properties. Stonegate's initial offer includes a substantial Community Improvement Fund donation to the HOA upon project approval, as well as a finder's fee to be paid to the board member who facilitates the acquisitions. The committee has identified Mr. Bryant's property, 122 Aspen Court, as a key strategic parcel due to its size and location. Ms. Hall noted that the non-conforming outbuilding on the Bryant property could present a point of leverage in future negotiations. Patrick felt a wave of cold fury wash over him. It was all there, in black and white. This had never been about aesthetics, or view corridors, or CC&Rs. It was about money. A lot of money. Kimberly was using the HOA as a weapon to harass him, to devalue his property, and to create leverage to force him into selling his home to a developer. She was manufacturing a violation as a pretext to drive him out, and she stood to gain personally from it a finder's fee, a kickback. His mind raced, connecting the dots. The man with the clipboard at his property line wasn't just from the ARC. He was likely an architect from Stonegate Developers. Assessing the land. Kimberly wasn't just a vindictive high school rival. She was a corrupt operator using her position for personal enrichment. Driven by this new revelation, Patrick spent the rest of the night digging. He went to the city's public planning and zoning portal. He searched for applications from Stonegate developers, and he found a preliminary zoning application, filed 2 months ago, for a multi-family condominium project. The application included a conceptual site plan. He downloaded the PDF, his hands shaking slightly. The map showed the 12 lots targeted for demolition. His house, 122 Aspen Court, was right in the middle, labeled Phase 1 Anchor Parcel. The cabin wasn't just a point of leverage. Its removal was essential to the project's proposed footprint. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the damning evidence. The fight was no longer about a fine or a violation. It was about saving his home from a conspiracy orchestrated by a woman who would burn down her own neighborhood for a payday. Kimberly, sensing that Patrick wasn't going to fold easily, escalated her campaign from bureaucratic harassment to psychological warfare. 2 weeks before his scheduled hearing, a flyer appeared on every doorstep in Laurel Creek. It announced a community harmony walkthrough to be led by President Hall and the ARC. The stated purpose was to proactively identify and assist homeowners with minor compliance issues to protect our collective property values. It was a thinly veiled inspection tour, and Patrick knew exactly who the primary target was. On the day of the walkthrough, Kimberly led a small procession of board members along the sidewalks, a clipboard in her hand and a look of grave concern on her face. Patrick watched from his window as she pointed out a patch of weeds in one yard, a slightly faded mailbox at another, and a small crack in the trim on a third house. She made a show of making friendly notes and chatting with the homeowners, assuring them these were just gentle reminders. 2 days later, Patrick was the only one to receive a formal complaint letter. The letter, sent from Aspire Management, detailed 3 new, trivial violations: a barely visible patch of moss on his north-facing roof shingles, a hairline crack in his driveway concrete, and a garden hose that was not coiled in a perfectly circular fashion, as stipulated by a recently passed rule. The message was clear: she was building a file. She was creating a paper trail to paint him as a problem resident, a serial violator who was uncooperative, and a threat to the neighborhood's pristine image. Her campaign extended to the neighborhood's social fabric, at the community mailbox. He overheard her talking to another neighbor, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's such a shame about the Bryants," she said. "Just loud enough for him to hear. He's a nice enough man, but so resistant to feedback. We're all in this together. And when one person refuses to be a team player, it really does affect everyone's investment." The poison worked. Neighbors who had once been friendly now offered him strained, tight-lipped smiles. Conversations at the community pool became brief and awkward. He was being subtly, methodically isolated, framed as the unreasonable nail that needed to be hammered down. The pressure took its greatest toll on Rachel. The constant stream of certified letters, the whispers from neighbors, and the looming threat of the hearing and fines were a toxic cloud of stress that settled over their home. One evening, after a particularly tense prenatal checkup, she came home looking pale and frightened. "The doctor is worried," she said, her voice small and trembling as she showed him her blood pressure reading. It was dangerously high. "He said I have to eliminate all major sources of stress, or we risk complications." He mentioned bed rest. "Patrick, I can't lose this baby." Tears welled in her eyes, and Patrick felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical blow. He pulled her into his arms, his own resolve wavering for the first time. Maybe we should just give them what they want," Rachel whispered against his chest. "Maybe we reside the cabin, or just drop the fight. It's not worth it. Nothing is worth risking her." She wasn't doubting him. She believed him completely. But she was being pragmatic. The fight was having real, tangible consequences for the health of their unborn child. It was a ticking clock, and every certified letter, every passive-aggressive email, was another minute ticking away. He looked at his wife, at the fear and exhaustion in her eyes, and then thought of his cabin, his principles, and the corrupt deal he had uncovered. For the first time, he truly understood the cost of this battle. Just before the annual meeting, while reviewing the county plat map one last time with Mr. Abernathy, Patrick noticed something he'd missed before. He was tracing his own property lines when he saw the footprint of Abernathy's small gardening shed, a structure he'd had for 30 years, encroached by approximately 1 foot onto the common area. It was a clear, if minor, violation. Kimberly, in all her meticulous inspections, had never noticed it. He felt a pit in his stomach. The plat map was one of his key pieces of evidence against Kimberly, but presenting it in a public forum to prove his case about the easement could inadvertently expose his friend and mentor to the very same kind of HOA harassment he was fighting. He faced a stark moral choice: protect himself by potentially sacrificing his friend, or weaken his own case to protect an innocent man. That evening, he went to Abernathy's house and laid the map on the dining table. He pointed to the encroachment. "Arthur," he said quietly, "my evidence could put you in their crosshairs." Abernathy studied the map for a long moment, then looked up at Patrick, his expression unreadable. He took a slow sip of his iced tea before speaking. "They could make me tear it down. Fine me. Make my life miserable for a year." He paused, then gave a dry, humorless smile. "But you know what's worse than that? Letting a bully in a pantsuit get away with selling out her entire neighborhood for a kickback." He tapped the map firmly. "Truth has a price. Son, let's pay it. You use that map. You use whatever you need to burn her to the ground." The Laurel Creek Estates annual meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool and stale coffee. 50 or 60 homeowners were scattered amongst the folding chairs, most looking bored and ready to fulfill their yearly civic duty as quickly as possible. At the front of the room, Kimberly Hall sat at a long table with the other 4 board members, looking regal and in control. A large digital timer was projected onto the screen behind her, its green numbers currently reading 500. Patrick was last on the agenda, under the heading Homeowner Open Forum, when his name was called. Kimberly introduced him with a condescending smile. "Our next speaker is Patrick Bryant, who has requested time to discuss a pending compliance matter. As per our bylaws, speakers are limited to 5 minutes. Please be respectful of everyone's time." Patrick walked calmly to the podium, his laptop in hand. He connected it to the projector, and the screen behind the board flickered to life, displaying his first slide. His heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against his ribs. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice even and clear, amplified slightly by the microphone. "My name is Patrick Bryant, from 122 Aspen Court. I'm here tonight to discuss the violation notice I received concerning my cabin. I believe this notice was issued in error, and I want to present 3 pieces of evidence to support that belief." He clicked to his first slide. On the screen, in large, bold text, was the direct quote from CC&Rs for 3.1.5, the grandfather clause. "First," Patrick said, "according to our own governing documents, any structure existing at the time of the community's development is grandfathered and exempt from ARC mandates. My cabin was built in the 1960s. 30 years before this HOA was formed. The violation is, therefore, procedurally invalid." A low murmur rippled through the room. A few people straightened in their chairs, suddenly paying attention. Kimberly's smile faltered. Second, Patrick continued. Clicking to the next slide, it showed a high-resolution image of the county plat map. The board has cited a view corridor easement as part of its justification. I went to the county recorder's office and pulled the official deed for that easement. He clicked again. The text of the deed appeared, and he used his laser pointer to highlight the final, crucial sentence. As you can see, the deed explicitly states that the easement applies only to the common area and does not encumber structures on private lots. The board has been knowingly misrepresenting a legal document to justify this violation. The murmuring grew louder. One of the other board members, a quiet woman named Susan, who had been on the board for years, leaned over and whispered something to the man next to her. Kimberly's face was now a thunderous mask. "Your time is nearly up, Mr. Bryant," she said sharply, her voice tight. The timer on the screen showed 1:45. "I only need one more minute," Patrick replied coolly. He clicked to his final, devastating slide. It showed two documents side by side. On the left was the page from the HOA minutes he had received, with the large black bars of redaction. On the right was the same page, unredacted, which he had found online. He highlighted the section mentioning Stonegate developers and the finder's fee. "Finally," Patrick said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "I was provided these redacted minutes from the board, but the unredacted version reveals the true reason for this violation. It's not about aesthetics. It's about a preliminary deal with Stonegate developers to build a condominium project on 12 of our lots. A project from which our president, Kimberly Hall, stands to receive a personal finder's fee for facilitating the sale of our homes." He clicked one last time, and the developer's zoning application appeared on the screen. A map of the neighborhood with 12 homes, including his own, shaded in red. The room erupted. The board apathy was gone, replaced by shock and outrage. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions at the board. "This is an outrage!" "A kickback, is this true?" Kimberly banged her gavel on the table. "This meeting is adjourned. Mr. Bryant, your time is up. This is slander." But it was too late. She had lost control of the room. And then, a calm, clear voice cut through the chaos. It was Susan, the longtime board member, the community's moral compass. She stood up, not looking at Patrick, but directly at Kimberly. "Kimberly, sit down," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The evidence is clear. The homeowner has raised legitimate and serious concerns about a conflict of interest and potential breach of fiduciary duty. According to our bylaws, a motion is required." The clubhouse was in an uproar. Kimberly Hall, pale and trembling with rage, remained standing, but the authority had drained from her posture. She looked not like a president, but like a defendant. Mr. Abernathy, who had been sitting quietly in the back, rose to his feet. "I move to censure Kimberly Hall for breach of fiduciary duty and immediately remove her from the office of president, pending the results of a full, independent financial audit of this board and its dealings with Aspire Management and Stonegate developers." "I second the motion," a voice called out from the crowd. The HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking man who had been trying to stay invisible, advised the remaining board members that a vote was legally required. Susan, now acting as de facto chair, called for a show of hands. An overwhelming forest of arms shot into the air. The vote was nearly unanimous. Kimberly Hall, stripped of her presidency in a public forum, sank into her chair, utterly defeated. The community she had tried to manipulate and sell out had, in 5 short minutes, turned on her completely. In the ensuing chaos, motions were passed to freeze all ARC activities, to hire an independent auditor immediately, and to form a special committee to investigate the board's relationship with Aspire Community Management. The meeting didn't end. It transformed into a raw, democratic revival. Neighbors who had been turned against Patrick now approached him, shaking his hand, clapping him on the back, and apologizing for believing Kimberly's narrative. He had not only saved his home, he had liberated his neighborhood. Patrick and Rachel left the clubhouse and walked home under the cool, starry sky. The tension that had been a constant companion for weeks finally began to dissipate. When they reached their front door, Rachel stopped and put her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood up to her, and you won." He held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart and the gentle stirring of their daughter inside her. He hadn't just won a fight over a cabin. He had protected his family, his principles, and his home. Weeks later, the fallout from the annual meeting settled into a new, healthier reality for Laurel Creek. The independent audit was a bloodbath. It revealed that Kimberly had used HOA funds for personal legal consultations related to the development deal and had approved payments to Aspire Management for consulting fees that were, in fact, reimbursements for their assistance in her harassment campaign. Aspire Community Management was fired by the new interim board in a unanimous vote. Kimberly Hall, facing not only community ostracism, but also potential civil litigation from the HOA, put her house on the market and moved away within a month. The new board, led by Susan, sent a community-wide email. It included a formal public apology to Patrick and Rachel Bryant and announced that the violation notice against their property was officially and permanently rescinded. The cloud was finally, completely lifted. A few days later, Patrick sat in his cabin, sketching not for a client, but for his community. He had an idea. The audit had recovered several $1,000s in improper fees from the old management company. Instead of just returning it to the reserves, he saw an opportunity. He drafted a simple, elegant design for a new playground and community garden to be built on an underutilized common area at the end of the block. It was a space that would bring families together, a place for kids to play and neighbors to connect. He attached a detailed cost estimate, showing that the project could be fully funded by the recovered money. He proposed to donate his architectural services for free. He sent the proposal to the new board. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The project that had been intended to divide and destroy their neighborhood was replaced by one designed to heal and unite it. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Patrick stood with Rachel and their newborn daughter, Lily, at the ribbon cutting for the new Laurel Creek Community Park. The once empty patch of grass was now a vibrant space, filled with the laughter of children on new swings and the scent of fresh soil from the community garden beds. Mr. Abernathy was proudly showing a group of kids how to plant tomatoes, his infamous shed still standing exactly where it had been for 30 years. The conflict had started with a threat to a small, private cabin, but it had ended by creating a new, shared heart for the entire neighborhood. Patrick looked from the smiling faces of his neighbors to his wife and his daughter, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were finally, truly home.